DW Inside Europe.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. On today's programme, looking forwards, looking back with our correspondents in Brussels, Paris and Kyiv.
Every couple of weeks you have stories of people who are not only seeing their homes destroyed by bits of falling debris, but also losing their lives sitting at home in their bedrooms watching a movie, unwilling and unable after almost 3 years to go down to the basement every time there's an air raid alert. Sometimes these alerts can go on for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours.
Plus, we plunge headfirst into the currents pulling us inexorably towards Germany's up-and-coming elections. It's shaping up to be quite a year. In ancient Roman religion and myth, bear with me, Janus is the god of beginnings, transitions and endings. He is often depicted as having two faces, one looking to the future and one looking to the past. Now, it's not that I'm comparing Inside Europe to mythical deities, but if I were to, then this episode would certainly be a Janus of a programme. We're marking the transition into the new year by looking back and looking ahead. To help us straddle the crack between the year that was and the year that is, we have tasked three correspondents, Terry Schultz in Brussels, John Lawrenson in Paris and Nick Connolly in Kyiv, with sharing with us the image which will most stick in their minds when they think back to 2024. To Terry with the EU perspective first.
I'm Terry Schultz in Brussels. When I look back at 2024, the image that sticks in my mind is one that shocked many in the European Union and also explains everything you need to know about the challenges for the bloc in the future. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban showing up in Moscow, shaking hands with Vladimir Putin. It was just a few days after Hungary took over the 6-month rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union in July, and Orban, considered a close friend of the Kremlin, had declared himself on a peace mission that in his mind included talks with Moscow. That's not a view shared by almost any other EU country as long as Russia is invading its neighbor Ukraine unprovoked. But all the outrage in the world couldn't stop Viktor Orban from making this trip on his own, just like he continues to block consensus regularly on issues such as aid for Ukraine. And this, dear listeners of Inside Europe, is the epitome of the political environment faced by the bloc as it navigates the coming years. Elections for the European Parliament in July, which happen every 5 years, were very successful for right-wing populist parties and politicians like Viktor Orban, while Liberals and Greens lost big time in most countries. Well, what's going on there? Well, the economy was the big election issue this year. Even though technically inflation, for example, is nowhere near the spikes we saw a couple of years ago after the pandemic, people don't feel economically secure, and that affects how they vote. I know for myself, the mother of 2 teenage boys, it feels like food especially just keeps getting more and more expensive each time I go shopping. I was curious as to whether that's actually true as a big supporter of counter-disinformation, so I looked it up for this retrospective, and believe it or not, across the EU, food prices actually went down this year from February through the summer, which surprised me. And now they're climbing month to month, but just a little bit, less than it seems like they are. Energy prices are also high, but again, nowhere near what we saw a couple of years ago. But back to our elections. The feeling that the economy is bad was one big reason why voters were expected to and largely did vote out incumbent politicians in this wave of elections. While the center-right European People's Party, or EPP, remained the largest political group in the parliament, which basically secured the re-election of Ursula von der Leyen as commission chief, Liberals and Greens lost seats to the right and the far right. In fact, if all the far-right parliamentarians created one political group, they would form the second largest group in the European Parliament behind the EPP. That's unlikely because they have a lot of disagreements between them, but their success overall will still have a huge impact on EU conversations and legislation going forward on issues like migration, enlargement, trade. Von der Leyen definitely will have her hands full for 2025 as she tries desperately to present an image of unity of the 27, with Russia's war on Ukraine on their doorstep and so much of the world in conflict. And one reason that's going to be more important than ever is because of another election in the EU's number one ally and trading partner, or at least it was as of 2024, the U.S. Donald Trump's presidency will prove to be a massive challenge for the EU in 2025. And coming full circle here, Trump and Viktor Orban consider themselves best buddies. Mar-a-Lago was also a stop on Orban's so-called peace mission. We'll have a lot to talk about in Inside Europe's end-of-year review next December.
It's been a rocky ride in France too, and hold on tight because it is by no means over yet.
I'm John Lawrenson in Paris. When I look back at 2024, the image that sticks in my mind is Emmanuel Macron saying, "Je dissous ce soir l'Assemblée nationale." I'm dissolving this evening the National Assembly. His candidate had just been soundly beaten by the far-right National Rally, the party of Marine Le Pen, and new National Rally star 29-year-old Jordan Bardella actually got more than twice the number of votes. The biggest National Rally victory to date, therefore. But still, a sane reaction to this would have been the classic Gallic shrug. Only half of the electorate turns out to vote in these Euro polls, and of those, I would suggest only a tiny fraction have any more than the vaguest idea what the European Parliament is for. Practically no one has a clue what members of the European Parliament do, and practically no one cares. What's more, there's no real impact from the makeup of the European Parliament on the government of France. So Macron did this, I think, because he thought an electoral showdown with the National Rally would do him good. It usually does. He's confronted Marine Le Pen twice in the second round of presidential elections and won both times. But things didn't go to plan this time, and he set in motion the extraordinary trail of political events of the past few months. First, it was snap parliamentary polls. The National Rally trounced its opponents in the first round. If France had the British electoral system, the National Rally would have won an absolute majority and Jordan Bardella would be Prime Minister of France today. But the French electoral system is run over 2 rounds. So all the other parties got in a huddle. The centre-right Republicans, the centrist Modem, Macron's Renaissance Party, the Greens, the Socialists, the Communists, the far-left France Unbowed Party, and agreed to withdraw their candidates in favour of those best placed to beat the National Rally. Bardella and Le Pen's lot still won more seats than any other party, but they failed to win an overall majority. In fact, they didn't even come close. So the electoral pact paid off handsomely. The trouble was the parties that won only had one thing in common: the belief that the National Rally must not govern. About everything else, the debt, immigration, education, law and order, taxation, public spending, pension reform, they disagree, as Michel Barnier would soon find out. It's as if the French have elected to power a party called the We Are Not the National Rally Party, which is showing itself to be incapable of government. What does 2025 hold in store for France? It would not be surprising, after seeing how We Are Not the National Rally Party has performed, if the French decide to see if the other side can do better. And if this happens, Emmanuel Macron will only have himself to blame.
Our final voice in this section is that of DW's Kyiv correspondent Nick Connolly, and when you hear his abiding image of 2024, it somehow makes all the politicking in Brussels and the Western capitals seem very tawdry indeed.
When I look back at 2024, the image that sticks in my mind is probably one of the last kind of strong impressions, unexpected things I've seen just now in the last few days. I was getting ready for my yoga lesson online and was just looking for my yoga mat, and suddenly there was a sound outside my window here in the centre of Kyiv. Sounded like a kind of lawnmower or maybe a moped, and literally a couple of 100 metres outside my window, flying very low over the roofs of the apartment block opposite me, was a Russian drone, a Shahed drone of the kind that Russia has sent thousands into Ukraine in recent months, flying basically dead straight towards the centre of Kyiv from the north. And I carried on and I had my online lesson because this is now just the normality of people in Kyiv. On the one hand, this can seem like a city that is living a very normal and very privileged, compared to the rest of the country, European life. Cafes are open, restaurants are open. Lots of people are being called up to the military, but it doesn't mean that the cafes are empty and that all the men are sitting at home trying to avoid the draft. That's definitely not the case in terms of what you see on the streets here. But Ukraine simply doesn't have the resources to shoot all of these drones down with expensive missiles. They're having to shoot at them with machine guns. So even in the centre of Kyiv, you are hearing machine gun or other fire pretty routinely at the same time as normal city life and preparations for the New Year celebrations are going on in the middle of broad daylight. And, every couple of weeks you have stories of people who are not only seeing their homes destroyed by bits of falling debris, but also losing their lives sitting at home in their bedrooms watching a movie, unwilling and unable after almost 3 years to go down to the basement every time there's an air raid alert. Sometimes these alerts can go on for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, most of them at night, to make sure that people don't get a good night's sleep and wake up tired, unable to do their jobs. And unless it's a really acute threat of ballistic missiles or something that is more obviously dangerous, most people have got used to that and have just accepted that that is one of the risks of life here in Ukraine. But what does 2025 hold in store for Ukraine? I think the outside world really wants this war to end in a hurry. Obviously, Ukrainians do, but not at any price. They'll tell you, yes, we want this to end. We want to see the dying on the front lines end. But what is next? What's the guarantee that Russia won't just take a couple of years to rebuild its army and then come again and finish the job, potentially at a time when Ukraine's supporters are distracted with other issues? So there's a real worry here that there's going to be huge pressure on Ukraine to sign some bit of paper that doesn't guarantee its safety, that doesn't make it attractive for Ukrainian refugees to return home, and that basically leaves this country in a limbo, unsure of where the future leads and unable to really get into NATO, the EU and other Western structures. And at the same time, a sense from the soldiers you talk to on the front lines and also observers watching Russia that actually these two countries are still nowhere near ready to end this, that both still think that they can get more out of this. For Ukraine, it's about negotiating from a position of greater strength. For Russia, it's about pushing home that advantage. And somehow the outside world not really getting that and not really being able to talk to people here in Ukraine in a way that convinces them and that they will engage with.
DW's Kyiv correspondent Nick Connolly there, reminding us of the stakes. Nick is a regular feature on DW News, so download the Breaking News app for all the latest from Ukraine and elsewhere. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. You're listening to Inside Europe. Now, German parliamentary elections are just around the corner, so in anticipation of this programme, I phoned up DW's political correspondent Thomas Sparrow just before the Christmas break for a chat. Thomas, thank you so much for joining me. Listen, I really, when I was thinking about this show, it was very clear to me that you would be the person that I would want to speak to, because what a year it has been and what a year it is lining up to be. How are you feeling, first of all?
If I can be honest, I'm feeling exhausted because it was indeed a very busy year, 2024. There were all sorts of challenges.
There was a certain Wednesday not so very long ago, Thomas, where Donald J. Trump was re-elected, got his second term as president in the US. On that same Wednesday, the German coalition collapsed, and our senior long-standing editor and sort of bedrock of the programme, Helen Seeney, left us. So when you say that it's been a difficult year, I can completely empathise with that.
And it's even more interesting because that same Wednesday, I was actually 8,000 kilometers away from my normal place of work. I was actually in South America. So if you remember...
Thomas, there's no way, there's no chance that I will ever forget that. It was amazing because we were thinking, news was just happening so fast. I mean, it really did feel like kind of an avalanche that was hitting you, or a tsunami, wave after wave of sort of breaking news. And we're like, how on earth are we going to cover this? Within minutes, perhaps even seconds of reading on the wires that the German coalition had collapsed, you, who I knew to be on holiday in Colombia, were texting me saying, I've got this. I'm here for you if you need me. And honestly, that was such a relief. So thank you. Honestly, if there's a gold star this year, Thomas, then you get it. Thank you so much.
What I learned from that is either don't go on holiday and then things will be a bit more peaceful? Or if you go on holiday, take your equipment with you.
Yeah, lesson number 2, I think. Lesson number 1, we're going to forget. But listen, just to sort of, I've been. This is actually a conversation that I've really been wanting to have with you since that moment, because there was a moment that really struck me. We were in the studio and someone put on the television, and there was Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and immediately everyone in the studio sat up. And this is not something that happens usually when Olaf Scholz appears on television. He's, been sort of the man who wasn't there in terms of public perception of him, at least, I think. But here he was, and there was something different about him. He was looking at the camera. He was standing up straight, and he gave a very no punches pulled speech in which he clearly stated what had been, from his perspective, going on in the coalition, and it was he seemed like a man who had been freed. There'd been this sort of years of deadlock, and suddenly he was able to say what he thought and to fight politics on his own terms, on his own ground, without having to sort of always be the voice of compromise. And I guess for you, as a political correspondent, suddenly from that moment, things start moving, right? There's a pace. You've been covering for months, years, this sort of bickering, this infighting, and now suddenly politics is really happening again. Despite all the uncertainty, there must be a kind of a sense of excitement and momentum for you at the moment.
Absolutely, there's excitement, and that's something that I really cherish from being a political correspondent. And when you actually spoke to politicians, even sometimes not necessarily on camera or on the record, they would say, or analysts as well, they would say that it was coming to a point where the breakup of the coalition was not an if, but a when. So that basically people were waiting to see when that would happen. Even now, the coalition is no longer there. That three-party coalition is history, but you're still hearing on German television, in German newspapers, in the political debate, the same kind of bickering that you had before as to who's to blame, why the one party left or was forced to leave the coalition. And the question still remains, what's the best approach to deal with the economic problems that Germans are really feeling and that Germans are really concerned about?
Okay, and we are, of course, talking about Europe's biggest economies. So the answers to those questions have a massive impact, not just in Germany, but throughout Europe and even, further afield.
And that's important that you mention it. Just one small thing, Kate, because everything in Germany is linked to that power of the German economy. So if the German economy is in a good state, if the German economy is in a good position, then basically the country can play a more important role also internationally. That when that economic reputation is badly damaged, the political side is also badly affected. So this is always important to have in mind when we look at Germany and when we analyze the role that Germany is playing internationally.
Okay, so a lot at stake in these elections. What trajectory are we on, Thomas? Give me the timeline. When are they happening?
So 23rd of February 2025 is when the next federal elections will be held, and it's actually unusual for Germany to have federal elections in February and to have a political campaign in the middle of winter. Normally you have elections in September, so basically parties go out and campaign at the height of summer. So it is something very unusual also for us journalists to be covering a political campaign leading to that election in the middle of winter, a freezing cold winter as well. And if I had to describe with one word what Germany is experiencing now, I would say uncertainty. And that has to do with the fact that, again, if you look at it from an international perspective, many people would say, Germany is a stable country and things in Germany don't change very fast. But what we're seeing now in the country, that collapse of the government coalition, the fact that you have elections that were brought forward from September to February, the fact that you're looking at surveys and polls and numbers that are basically signaling that it will be very difficult to find a government coalition even after the election in February, that points, at least to me, that uncertainty, that insecurity from a political perspective is something that will continue. One thing is, the election is in February, but there could still be a long time before Germany has a government in place and before that German government can actually play a leading role again. So it's not as in other countries where you have an election and then a few days, weeks later, maybe you have a government. Here, after the election, is when parties need to begin to sit down and try and find political agreement and get that coalition agreement in place. And that could take a very long time, especially if you look at how things are now.
So looking at those polls now, and obviously between now and February, a lot can shift, but looking at them now, what kind of patterns are emerging, and perhaps who is the key person to watch in terms of the most likely future German chancellor?
As of today, the party that is leading in the polls is the conservative bloc, so CDU-CSU bloc, which is led by Friedrich Merz. Friedrich Merz is the chancellor candidate of that conservative bloc, and according to all analysis that you see nowadays, he's basically the next chancellor, if results remain like this. The question is with which party or parties the CDU-CSU bloc would make a coalition. Because if you look at the Social Democrats, the party that now are leading the government under Chancellor Olaf Scholz, they only have around 16% of the vote. The Greens, which have also been in the government coalition, have around 14%. So basically parties would really have to get together and see how they could form a majority in parliament. And that is something that does not promise to be very easy. That also has to do with the fact that you have two parties, but at least I'll focus on one, that are playing also an important role, and that is the AfD, the far-right AfD. They are now around 18% of the polls, and that basically means that since every other party has stressed that they will not work together with the AfD, that makes that 18% sort of out of the picture when it comes to trying to form a coalition.
Finally, I promise this is the final question. You said that 2024 was the year of uncertainty. Complete the sentence. 2025 will be the year of?
More uncertainty.
I knew you were going to say that. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us. And also thank you for your stellar reporting for us on German politics throughout the year. And we look forward to much more to come in 2025.
If it's from Berlin, from Mallorca, or from Colombia, or from wherever, I'm always happy to be on the program.
Oh, thank you, Thomas. Thomas Sparrow there. So much happening here in Germany right now. We are here to walk you through it all, of course. All you have to do is subscribe to Inside Europe wherever you get your podcasts. Just before we go to break, a quick announcement. The German Human Rights Film Prize 2024 has been awarded in Nuremberg. The winner in the category short film was Cell 5, a reconstruction by the visual artist Mario Pfeiffer. This is part of an ongoing project that we've covered previously in the programme, which involved Pfeiffer commissioning a leading forensics expert to recreate one of Germany's most notorious death in custody cases, the death by burning of the asylum seeker Uri Jallo in a police cell in Dresden in 2005. Here's Mario Pfeiffer talking to me on a previous episode of Inside Europe.
And somehow it's up to the artist and art to remind us of the complexity of these circumstances. This is not only a news report for me, it's a long investigation. Yeah. So if you look at how media treats this case, it's always in news if something new comes out. But 2 weeks later, by latest, we have forgotten. Art has the chance to preserve a story, an issue. I can't change the justice system, but what I can do is to give a society the means to look at themselves, to make up their mind, and also to take action.
Mario Pfeiffer with that plea for the power of art to reach where politics sometimes can't. This is Inside Europe. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany.
Dum
listening to Inside Europe. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. It's 2025, a new year, and I've decided to begin it with a miracle. And this is not magical thinking. I have a bona fide, real-life miracle that I've been saving up for you. If I were to tell you that right now, in Berlin, there is a place where, despite everything, despite war, terror, the horrors of both the past and the present, young Israelis and Palestinians are living, learning and working alongside each other and their contemporaries from various Arab countries to produce world-class classical music, would you believe me? If you've heard of the West-Eastern Divan project, you would. The story of how the West-Eastern Divan Orchestra came to be is genuinely one of the best instances of hope in the dark that I can think of. And as it happens, I know someone who was there, right at the beginning. The year was 1999. In the Middle East, the armed Palestinian uprising known as the First Intifada was over, but the tensions that would lead to the Second Intifada were very much in the air. Meanwhile, in Germany, musician and arts journalist Brendan O'Shea was in Weimar to report on the historic city's spell as European capital of culture. Would he be interested in travelling out of town to visit a project that Daniel Barenboim and Edward Said were working on together, he was asked. Needless to say, he said yes. Already back then, the Jewish-Argentinian-Israeli conductor Daniel Barenboim was a towering figure in the world of classical music, and Edward Said was widely considered to be the leading Palestinian intellectual of his generation. The fact of their collaboration at such a time seemed startlingly unlikely, radical even, and now, a quarter of a century later, its legacy seems more radical still. And so, in way of a New Year's gift, here's Brendan O'Shea with a feature he's calling Bridging Borders, 25 years of the West-Eastern Divan Orchestra.
The poems that make up the West-Eastern Divan were published in 1819 by one of Germany's greatest poets, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. The anthology is the last major cycle of poetry Goethe wrote. The poems were inspired by Goethe's correspondence with the actor Marianne von Willemer and by Joseph von Hammer's translations of poems by the Persian poet Hafiz. Fast forward to 1999, and the title inspired an entirely different project, this time spearheaded by Daniel Barenboim, the renowned Argentine-Israeli pianist and conductor, and Edward Said, the celebrated Palestinian-American academic and literary critic. A chance meeting in a London hotel had sparked this unlikely yet remarkable friendship between these two towering figures. Through years of conversation, they discovered a shared belief that music is a universal language, as Edward Said reflected in 1999.
That's what's so fascinating about music, as you and other musicians have described it. I mean, it is obviously like a language, but it's a language without the kinds of concepts that you find in, spoken and written language. When you talk to a student, for example, in a class where you're teaching, let's say, a poem or a novel, the words mean something quite specific. I mean, you talk about a glass, you talk about a lamp, you talk about a person. So there's a denotation there. And in that respect, the student immediately, his or her background becomes absolutely relevant to what they're saying. And they say it. In my own experience, this is simply untrue, or I can identify with this, or I hate this character, or something like that. Whereas in the music, there's a very emotional kind of content to it. But it's not about the personal in the same way. I mean, it's as if it was, but it isn't really. It's kind of a paradox.
Barenboim and Said's friendship inspired the creation of a project that brought together young musicians from Israel, the occupied Palestinian territories, and various Middle Eastern countries. Emerging during the turbulent years of the First Intifada, 1987 to 1993, the project was miraculous from its inception, yet it remained deeply controversial. The orchestra's manager, Tabare Pelas.
You can imagine every one of these musicians is a wonderful character because they have the courage to come and actually play with the enemy. As you may imagine, some of these musicians, they are criticized, or many of them are criticized back home. How can you go and play with the Israelis? How can you go and play with the Palestinians or the Syrians and so on? And they believe in what we do here. They believe that they come here, they experience something that opens their mind, and where they, I think probably most of them had a certain type of interest and openness before coming. But once being in the orchestra, it really, changes a lot of how you think and what you think.
Edward Said passed away in 2003. But by then the ensemble was already established and grown into a fully functioning orchestra. Meanwhile, Daniel Barenboim continued to introduce new ideas and foster discussions within the group. Barenboim is a towering figure in the world of classical music, yet from the beginning it was the young musicians who took centre stage.
The music sounds different when the orchestra reacts only to the conductor. Any professional conductor can make a willing professional orchestra play the way he wants. This is not music making. Music can only happen. It's after all the orchestra musicians who actually produce the sound, and in that respect, it is different. And I don't believe in seeing the orchestra as several groups, the first violins, the clarinets, the bass, etc. In the same way that I don't believe in seeing the pianist as having two units, two hands. It's either one unit, which is a combination of the two hands. In the orchestra, it's one unit, a combination of the whole orchestra, or 100 units of individuals, and I believe very much that every musician in the orchestra conceives the music.
Dialogue, both musical and political, has been at the heart of the West-Eastern Divan project since those early days in Weimar, when, alongside rehearsals that were mostly led by Barenboim, evenings were spent in workshops and group conversations, where the young musicians from various parts of the Middle East were given the chance to mix and meet with other contemporaries and learn about their prospective countries from each other. Just the fact that the project was a collaboration between a legendary Jewish-Israeli musician and the most famous Palestinian intellectual of the 20th century was enough to make musicians like Palestinian violinist Hisham Khoury want to be a part of it.
I think Edward Said is a name that every Palestinian household knows. I think just hearing the word Edward Said and Daniel Barenboim as a Palestinian and a musician, a classical musician, that resonated so much with me that I really felt that I need to be part of this project. It's somehow, it was my essence in a way, yeah? Classical music and intellectualism, Palestinian, and it felt like that's a place for me to be.
Or Israeli violist Tal Teradoro, who joined the group over 21 years ago. It was a tragic death of a close friend that led her to become part of the ensemble.
I can say that I was very excited to come. I had already friends that joined the orchestra beforehand. I have also a personal story behind it. One of my best friends has been killed in a terrorist attack the previous summer. And I saw this opportunity to actually engage in deeper conversation and actually to know people from around the conflict. So not only musically I was intrigued, but also intellectually and environment.
The orchestra grew and flourished with regular concerts across Europe. In 2006, it performed at the United Nations in New York, and in October 2015 at the UN headquarters in Geneva. In recognition of his efforts, Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon appointed Daniel Barenboim as a U.S. Messenger of Peace in 2007, and in 2016 named the West-Eastern Divan Orchestra a UN Global Advocate for Cultural Understanding. Since its early years, one of the orchestra's goals has been to perform in all the countries represented by the musicians, with concerts in Rabat, Doha and Abu Dhabi. However, the landmark concert in Ramallah in 2005 was one of the most significant steps toward achieving this ambition.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I think what I have to say to you, I have already said in the music. Nevertheless, if you will bear with me for just a few seconds, let me tell you that this orchestra of wonderful, intelligent, and courageous people from Palestine, from Israel, from Lebanon, from Syria, from Jordan, from Egypt, and from Spain, all of them very courageous people. You, of all audiences in the world, I don't have to explain how much courage it takes for each and every one of them to come and play with the other. This project that Edward Said and I founded in 1999 has been sometimes described in a very flattering way for us as an orchestra for peace, an orchestra that will bring this and that other feeling. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. This is not going to bring peace. You know that. The fact that these wonderful people play together here will not bring peace. What it can bring is understanding, the patience, the courage, and the curiosity to listen to the narrative of the other. This is what this is about. In this context, everybody has been able to express himself freely, and perhaps just as important, to hear the version of the other. This is why we come to you here today with a message of humanity, not with a political message, with a message of humanity, a message of solidarity.
The event was controversial due to its political and symbolic significance. The orchestra's performance in a Palestinian city highlighted the possibility of cooperation, but also drew criticism. Many Israelis saw it as aligning with Palestinian causes, while some Palestinians viewed it as normalization that overlooked the realities of occupation. Logistical challenges, such as securing permits for Israeli musicians, underscored the deep divisions in the region. Barenboim's outspoken criticism of Israeli policies made him a polarizing figure, with some praising his efforts for peace and others condemning him. Yet the Ramallah concert was especially meaningful for the musicians Hisham and Tal.
I was fortunate to be in the Ramallah concert, so the whole journey to Ramallah and the excitement of are we going to play, are we not going to play, how it's going to be, and then being on stage, being able to play, then rushing back into the cars and getting home, and then all of a sudden you are home and you had this great experience and you don't know what to do with it because you didn't have time to process it even. You just had to, everything was so rushed. But I remember the moment that we were waiting also for the concert, sitting on the grass in Ramallah and like having the view of Ramallah. It was a, amazing experience.
Was a documentary made of this orchestra when they performed, the entire orchestra performed in Ramallah in 2005. It really, I felt that it's resonated so much with me. And since then, I wanted to be a part of it, so I auditioned and then,
Daniel Barenboim went on to fulfill a shared wish with Edward Said to establish an institution that would operate full-time based on the principles they first explored in the 1999 Weimar workshop. In 2017, the Barenboim Said Academy opened in Berlin and has since become an integral part of the German capital's music scene. Over 80% of its students come from Middle Eastern countries, and alongside exceptional music training, the Academy places great emphasis on students learning about their own homelands and their neighbouring countries. The Academy's director is Regula Rapp.
This winter semester, 2024-25, we have a total of 85 students from 27 different nations. The core group comes from the Middle East. The second special feature is the composition of the curriculum. In addition to teaching orchestral instruments, piano and composition as main subjects, mostly taught by highly renowned professors, we also offer a mandatory program in history, philosophy and literature.
Jakob Eder teaches modern and contemporary history at the Barenboim Said Academy.
And to see the kind of discussions, Israeli and Iranian students have in my seminar, or Israeli and Palestinian students that, don't always have to be about the conflict, because we all know that we're not going to change the world and we're not going to solve, any concrete political questions, challenges. But to see that people can find a way to talk to each other and find a way to argue and disagree and still get along with each other, it gives me some optimism and hope. And for me as a teacher, that's a very rewarding experience.
On October 7, 2023, the world awoke to the shocking news that Hamas had launched an unprecedented terror attack on Israel, firing rockets and infiltrating communities near the Gaza border. Militants carried out mass shootings, kidnappings, and other acts of violence. In response, Israel launched an aerial and ground war in Gaza, which, according to figures released by the authorities in Gaza this week, has so far claimed over 45,000 Palestinian lives, with the UN Rights Office estimating that nearly 70% of the casualties are women and children. Nearly 2 million people are currently internally displaced within the 360 square kilometre Gaza Strip, with the World Food Programme warning of imminent famine. These events have deeply affected both the musicians of the West-Eastern Divan Orchestra and the students of the Barenboim Said Academy in Berlin, explains Regula Rapp.
I would say that even before, it wasn't easy to maintain this dialogue. And of course, it has become much more difficult since then. Because all of the musicians coming from the region are naturally deeply concerned and fearful, always keeping an eye and ear on what's happening in their home countries. We've significantly expanded personal counseling and coaching to ensure students can find support. Interestingly, the students are very eager to seek answers to their questions by broadening their knowledge. It turns out that the professor of history and the professor of philosophy are in high demand. Back in October of last year, I immediately lifted mandatory attendance requirements for classes, as I believed, and this was also discussed with the student union, that given the current circumstances, we shouldn't force anyone to engage with something if they didn't feel able to. However, it became clear that the students still wanted to come. Of course, there's also depression, grief, and withdrawal. But who are we to judge what they're going through? We also organized a lecture series to which the entire building was invited. Literally everyone, from the front desk to the management. In this series, we alternated between a Palestinian, an Israeli, and a German speaker. It's also important to me that the students understand why we are here in Berlin and how the whole discussion, which is difficult enough, can be understood and contextualized in Germany. We have also had truly remarkable personalities from Israel and Palestine as guests, which I should mention. And you can see in the discussions that the first question always goes to the students after each lecture. You can really sense in the students' reactions the despair or anger or grief, or even the total helplessness, this feeling of being powerless, which I believe is one of the worst things.
The events since October 23 have also significantly impacted the West-Eastern Divan Orchestra. Yet the ensemble has continued to perform with unwavering dedication, and this despite the immense challenges many of its musicians face, both in their home countries and in Germany, where discussions on the Middle East are often complicated by the country's consciousness of its own horrific past.
I feel the lack of empathy around us for each one, no matter where you come from in the conflict.
Tal Teodoro explains that the orchestra also fosters a safe environment where members can openly share their fears.
For me, the role of the orchestra is actually to give this space for the people who come from the region to, first of all, be able to be with each other and find this empathy towards each other. Although the noises around us and voices around us are strong and getting even stronger against each other. And I'm not justifying anything, or it's not about that. It's just like a safe haven. In a way, I would like this orchestra always to be a place where the dialogue and the friendships and the connection through music gives us kind of a comfort place of all this sadness, and share also this sadness with each other. To know that I can trust the person that is in front of me, and I can share my sadness and what is painful about what's going on right now.
I think it's been a very difficult and challenging time for a lot of people in the orchestra. Mainly for me, just sometimes losing hope that, things are not going to change. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. And also finding the strength, to come back and to connect with people that sometimes you don't always have full understanding with, but still, then to find the energy and to do music with them and then push through that and to push towards something which is greater than us. But it has had its challenges, I would say. But I think nobody here is losing hope.
The past 25 years of the West-Eastern Divan Orchestra have been anything but smooth. Yet despite constant adversity and hardship, its musicians remain steadfast in their mission. Speaking with Tal and Hisham, I can feel the enduring presence of the orchestra's founders, Edward Said and Daniel Barenboim. Everyone knew this project wouldn't be easy, but perhaps its greatest success is reflected in these musicians who have fully embraced and embodied the ensemble's ideals.
We will continue doing it because I believe in the project. I believe in the initial message or the idea of Edward Said and Daniel Barenboim. And I think this is also why many of us come back, although we have our differences. But I think the idea and this notion of this project is so much embedded in us, and we would like to work, even when we're not comfortable, to something which I think we need.
Music is a channel. It's a channel for emotions. It's a channel for non-spoken words. It's a medium for so many things. I think nowadays, maybe if we start to realize more, at least in the academic world, where music and art takes the place of healing and actually prescribing culture for people, and art methods and everything in order for us to get to a better place, not needing the medicines. And so I think music has a very important role in our well-being.
For DW, Brendan O'Shea in Berlin.
I thought I'd leave you with the writer Rebecca Solnit's definition of hope as a belief that what we do might matter, an understanding that the future is not yet written. Hope looks forwards but draws its energies from the past, from knowing histories, including our victories and their complexities and imperfections. Happy New Year.
Thank you very much.
This programme was produced by me, Kate Laycock, with help from Sam Baker and sound technicians Ziad Abu Sleiman and Thomas Schmidt. Our feedback address is insideeurope@dw.com. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Bonn, Germany.